Let's bring in Democratic Congressman Lloyd Doggett of Texas. He has sponsored legislation to protect the special counsel. Sir, with a welcome to you. Before we get into the meat of our conversation, I'm sure you'd like to offer some thoughts on the passing of Senator John McCain.
Well, thanks, Alex. Absolutely. What an American patriot, a man of honor and integrity, who was willing to admit some shortcomings like the rest of us, and who would work and respect people he disagreed with, and particularly recognize the importance of getting the polluting effect of big money out of our election system. I think you could say, in short, that John McCain has been everything that Donald Trump is not. And his loss is felt now for many reasons. So much of the commentary is about his many past accomplishments and devotion to our country. But I think about it in terms of the future at this very perilous time for our democracy, that Republicans need someone to provide a moral compass, a person to speak the truth, who's not retiring. And John McCain was that kind of person, and I don't see many people in the Republican Party now, whatever the wrong Donald Trump commits, whatever the insult that he engages in, their strategy is essentially duck and cover, and we need people to speak out, trying to bring our country together and to constrain a president who just keeps testing the water with one outrage after another to see how much this Republican Congress will let him get away with.
And you know, Congressman, you make the point that John McCain, he was able to admit his frailties when he'd made a mistake and apologize for doing so, something that we do not hear much from any member of Congress, really. But in your mind, by doing that, look, this is a very forgiving republic. Americans forgive people. Do you think that it lowered his standing and respect in the eyes of the greater community by doing so, or maybe uplifted him into being someone to admire?
You know, I think he stood a little taller because we could see him in him recognizing our own frailties and our mistakes, that it's okay, that Americans will accept people that are imperfect and as flawed as they are. And that's something, of course, that President Trump, he never has to say he's sorry. He refuses to do that and is always pointing more forcefully at his adversaries in such crude and inappropriate ways.
All right, well, let's go. Given that you've sponsored the legislation to protect the special counsel, I want to get to the meat of all of that, sir. So ultimately, if the president is indeed an unindicted co-conspirator, as outlined in the Michael Cohen plea deal, doesn't that in itself reach a threshold for impeachment? And if Democrats are not going to talk about this until after the midterms, isn't this then a political strategy to not do so?
Well, it could well reach that when you have Michael Cohen say that the president directed him to violate federal laws for his own advancement on the eve of the election. I think that's very significant. You mentioned people talking about impeachment. The people I hear talking about impeachment are all Republicans. They're out there realizing that their anti-immigrant hysteria, their phony tax bill can only carry them so far. They don't think it will get them over the finish line on most of these campaigns they're about to lose, and so they keep trying to stir up their voters by using the term impeachment. What we really need to be focused on is accountability and some check on the unrestrained power that the Republican Congress has permitted Donald Trump to assume. And I believe that's where the focus should be. You know, if you were going back to Senator McCain, if you were to compare him with some other figure, Vietnam veteran, Purple Heart, proud conservative Republican, devoted to public service, probably the person who fits that best, even though their careers are very different, is Bob Mueller. And I want to see that his investigation is protected. I don't know where it will ultimately lead us, but that's where the focus should be, and the willingness of Congress to push back a little bit every time that Donald Trump attacks an American democratic institution, our free press, our legal system, our rule of law. That's where Congress needs to be. I do think Donald Trump is the #1 issue on the November ballot, but not about his impeachment, but about his refusal to defend and his willingness to defend democratic institutions and his willingness to move us to a more authoritarian place.
So I want to play for you for what one of your colleagues, Democratic Congressman Denny Heck of the Intelligence Committee, told me yesterday. Here's that.
The president's going to become increasingly isolated, and as we know from history, this can be very, very traumatic psychologically for the occupant of the Oval Office. And in fact, we have a precedent for that in modern history, and I think it's instructive. The prediction I would now make, Alex, is that at some point the president will consider resigning his office for the good of the country.
So if we're not at a level of impeachment rather, where would be that threshold for resignation?
Well, I wish it were this afternoon. I think Mr. Trump is unfit to be our president, that every day he is in office, he endangers in a greater way the security of our families. I generally agree with Denny Heck. I would disagree only to this point. To date, we haven't seen that isolation, maybe from his lawyers, from his staff members who have an impossible job in the White House, but the Republican base reflected in the members of Congress with whom we serve, they're still hugging Donald Trump when they're not ducking and covering from him. And until we see them speak out, I think Trump will feel he can still get away with things and that there's no reason to resign. He's still bragging about the great job he's doing, which is something that clearly most Americans don't see. I believe my neighbor here in Austin, Admiral McRaven, another great American patriot in the same form as John McCain, has spoken out so eloquently in his letter to the president about Trump's embarrassment in front of our children, how he has caused problems for us in the world, but most importantly, how he has divided Americans from one another. And that's Donald Trump all over again.
Democratic Congressman Lloyd Doggett of Texas, sir, thank you so much for your insights. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Alex.